Erev Tov Rabotai, we are continuing with our Mishna Yomi. We begin today new Masechet, Mishnayot Masechet Eruvin. We will translate and explain the Mishnah based off the notes and the commentary of the article elucidated as we had done with Mishnayot Masechet Brachot, Mishnayot Masechet Shabbat. We know that the Torah prohibits 39 types of work, Melacha and Shabbat. These are listed in the Mishnah in Masechet Shabbat, chapter 7, Mishnah 2. The final Melacha on the list is Hotza'ah, literally taking out, but we refer to it as transferring, which entails moving an object from a private domain to a public domain, from a public domain to a private domain, or 4 amot in a public domain. Now this melacha is commonly referred to as carrying, but it includes all ways of moving objects such as pushing, pulling, and throwing. We recommend, as usual, to read the general introduction in the article elucidated to understand, to learn the different concepts of the different domains and Eruvin. Now, as an introduction to today's Mishnah, the commentaries explain that in the times of the Mishnah, we begin actually with chapter 1, Mishnah 1. Now, in the times of the Mishnah, houses and streets were arranged in the following manner. Several houses stood in a common courtyard, and several such courtyards opened into an alley to which the residents of the courtyards walked out to the main street. Now, whoever can see the diagrams brought down, elucidated, or in any other illustrated Mishnah, it'll help to understand what the Mishnah is talking about, the commentaries are referring to. Now, the street is a public domain, Reshut Harabim, but the alley, if it's enclosed on 3 sides, is a private domain, Reshut Yachid. The rabbis were concerned that people might view the alley as a public domain since it's used as a street and is completely open on one side. If carrying were permitted in the alley, people might come to carry in a real public domain as well, which is a biblical transgression. So to prevent this, the rabbis prohibited carrying in the alley. Now, as in the case with the Reshut Harabim, it's forbidden to carry 4 amot in the alley, from the Reshut Yachid into the alley, or vice versa. Of course, it remains prohibited to carry from the alley into the main street and vice versa, because the alley is a Reshut Yachid according to biblical law, and the street is a Reshut Harabim. The rabbis added, though, that if a certain adjustment is made to the entrance of the alley, carrying in it is permitted. However, the commentators point out it's also necessary for the residents of the courtyards to make a shitufei mevo'ot to allow carrying in the alley and a ruvei chatzirot to allow carrying in the courtyards. We will explain what these concepts are as we go along in the Mishnah, or whoever can read it in the general introduction, they'll be able to understand it now. Now, this adjustment can take the form of a cross beam, what we call a korah, placed above the entrance, or a pole, a lechi, placed at the side of the entrance. Now, most of this chapter refers to such an alley enclosed on 3 sides and open to the street on the 4th, in which carrying in is forbidden unless a crossbeam or pole is placed at the open side. So the first Mishnah begins by citing a dispute as to whether the crossbeam must be placed within a certain height from the ground. Mavoishu gavoa lemala me'isrim amah. If the crossbeam of an alley is more than 20 amot above the ground, yima'et. One must lower it, meaning it may not be higher than 20 amot, because the commentators explain, according to this Tanakam, this first opinion, it is meant to serve as a sign indicating that the alley is not a public domain, and a sign that is more than 20 amot above the ground is ineffective, because people will not notice it there. It must therefore be lowered to a height of 20 amot or less, where it will be noticed. Rabbi Yehuda says, "Eno tzarich," it is not necessary to lower the crossbeam. According to Rabbi Yehuda, the beam is not a sign which must be noticeable, but a partition that closes off the open side of the alley. So for this purpose, it's effective even if it's higher than 20 amot. According to Rabbi Yehuda, the sides of the beam are viewed as though they extend towards the ground, forming a complete wall, which is the halachic principle known as pi tikra, which again, the introduction explains that pi tikra yored v'sotem means the edge of a roof extends downwards and seals, which, as the words imply, the edge of a roof is considered to extend downward to the ground to form a partition, and it makes the area beneath the roof a private domain. However, the Rav does tell us, Ven halacha ki Rabbi Yehuda, the halacha does not follow Rabbi Yehuda, and therefore the cross beam cannot be more than 20 amot above the ground. So the Mishnah now discusses whether either adjustment, the crossbeam or pole, is effective if the alley's open side is more than 10 amot wide. V'arachav me'eser amot, and if the alley's opening is wider than 10 amot, yima'et, one must make it narrower. So for example, by placing boards at the sides of the entrance until it is 10 amot wide or less, because the commentators explain an opening that exceeds 10 amot is too wide to be considered a halachic entrance. Rather, it is just a breach in the alleys surrounding walls, because entrances are usually not wider than 10 amot. Therefore, it cannot be fixed with a crossbeam or pole, because those adjustments are valid only for an entrance. However, if the alley's open side has the form of a doorway, meaning there is a post at each side of the opening and a bar that extends from the top of one post to the top of the other, forming the shape of a doorway, which has two doorposts and a lintel, they call it. Even if the opening is wider than 10 amot, and one does not need to make it narrower, because the form of a doorway, that Surat Petach, is considered an entrance, no matter how wide it is. And that is an Rabotai of Mishnah Aleph. We continue now with Mishnah Bet. This Mishnah cites a dispute about the adjustments, the pole and crossbeam, that are needed to convert an alley into one where carrying is permitted. Hechshel Mavoy. This is the remedy that is required for an alley to make carrying permitted there. Bet Shammai Omrim, Bet Shammai say, Lechi v'Korah, both a pole at one side of the alley's entrance and a crossbeam over the entrance are necessary. Bet Hillel Omrim, but Bet Hillel say, Lechi o Korah, either a pole or a crossbeam is enough. Rabbi Eliezer says, he reports a different version of Bet Shammai's rulings. Lechayayin, Bet Shammai required two poles, one at either side of the entrance. And the commentators explain that Rabbi Eliezer agrees with Bet Shammai, but he heard a different version of what Bet Shammai said. And the Gemara on page 11b in Masechet Eruvin discusses whether Rabbi Eliezer means two poles in addition to a crossbeam or two poles without a crossbeam. The Mishnah now presents a disagreement as to whether the machloket, the dispute between Bet Shammai and Bet Hillel, is limited to a particular situation. Mishum Rabbi Yishmael Amar Talmid Echad Lifnei Rabbi Akiva. A student who the Rav says was Rabbi Meir said the name of Rabbi Yishmael before Rabbi Akiva. Lo nechleku Bet Shammai Bet Hillel. Bet Shammai and Bet Hillel did not disagree. Al mavoy shu pachod me'arba amot, regarding an alley that is less than 4 amot wide. Shu nitar o belechi o bekorah, that it can be rendered permissible to carry in with either a pole or a crossbeam. Meaning, even Bet Shammai accept that in such a narrow alley, either adjustment is noticeable on its own. Alma nechleku. So regarding what case did they disagree? Al rachav me'arba amot vad eser. They disagreed regarding an alley that is between 4 and 10 amot wide, which the commentators explain an alley whose entrance is wider than 10 amot cannot be rectified with a pole or crossbeam or both. Rather, its surat petach is required, like we just taught in the previous Mishnah. You need the form of a doorway. So, in the case regarding an alley that is between 4 and 10 amot wide is where they disagree. Shebet Shammai Omrim, Bet Shammai say, Lechi v'Korah, since the entrance is relatively wide, both a pole and a crossbeam are necessary. Bet Hillel Omrim, but Bet Hillel say, O Lechi, O Korah, even in this case, either a pole or a crossbeam suffices. However, Rabbi Akiva, the commentaries say, did not accept this limitation of the machloket of the dispute. Amar Rabbi Akiva said, Al zeh v'al zeh nechleku. Bet Hillel and Bet Shammai disagreed regarding both an alley narrower than 4 amot and an alley between 4 and 10 amot wide, with Bet Shammai requiring the two adjustments even at the entrance of a narrow alley. And that is in Rabotai of Mishnah Bet. Baruch Adonai Leolam, Amen v'Amen.